welcome to a very special and quite humbling episode of You Are the One You Seek. Now, this was my first attempt at an interview, and let's just say that there were some kinks. We had some technical issues getting set up, and then it came down to the wire where the thing just probably wasn't going to happen. However, my guest, Dr. Helen Hensley, hung in there like a trooper. She stuck around even despite me setting up the podcast extremely awkwardly once we were connected. I was fumbling over my words. She made a comment about her looks not being good, and instead of stating the obvious, which was in my mind, "No, you look great, Mary, as always," I deflected it back to me and how I didn't look good either. Just really some Bush League amateur stuff. And it's embarrassing and it's humbling to my ego, but I know that beyond that frailty in myself, there was some really great content from Mary. She really had a lot of interesting things to say, as always, enlightening things to say, and just a perspective that I really, really enjoy. So you will hear me struggle and suffer through my own inabilities to articulate myself, but if you can get past that, there's a lot of really good nuggets from Mary in here. So Dr. Helen Hensley is an author, speaker, NDE experiencer, musician, I'm sure just a number of things that I don't even know about. She's an incredible person, a radiant personality, and I'm so excited that I got to have her on the podcast. Crossing my fingers that she might come back on, and by God, I will have my act together so that I don't make a complete shit show out of it. So Mary, thank you so much, and here we go. Thank you for joining us today on You Are the One You Seek. My name is David, and I am here with an extremely special guest, Dr. Helen Hensley. Mary, how you doing?
Hey, y'all. How you doing? I'm glad to be here. Am I the first? Am I your first?
You are my first guest. Yes.
I'm very excited. It's been a long time since I was somebody's first.
Yes. I've only done a few episodes to this point, and they're just me monologuing, which I don't want to do a bunch of that because I only have my limited perspective, and I want to hear from people who have been inspiring me, and you are definitely one of those people. Last year, my wife and I came across your story on YouTube. It was Anthony Shane or Shanae, or I don't know how to say that.
Oh, yeah, Shane. Yeah. Uh-huh.
We saw that one, and just
the French filmmaker.
Yes. Yeah, his production value is stellar, which isn't really, of course, the point of the video.
Like he's an actual filmmaker. Yeah.
Yeah. That one was really inspiring. Your story was it really resonated with my wife and I. So I had emailed you immediately, just singing your praises, and then you sent me all those lovely tones. So I'm going to talk about that later.
Okay.
The tone files. But I know you've shared your story quite a bit on Anthony Shane and Next Level Soul and a couple other big podcasts. So I definitely want to hear your NDE story for new audiences, for people who haven't heard anything about NDEs or maybe just stumbled across my podcast and that's their first thing. But don't feel like you have to give the exact same replay.
Listen, for me at this stage, I'm telling this story almost 33 years, so it's and it's as exciting to tell each time. And there are times when I'm talking about it that I'm so immersed in the feeling of what it was like, or I remember something different, or no, it never grows old talking about it, because without it, obviously I wouldn't be here. And it's upon that foundation that I've built the entire life that I enjoy right now, which is pretty amazing, because I have a life centered around not just service, which I think is really important, because I have a life that's centered around the self. And we've been taught for so long that that's not a good thing, to be self-centered. But when taken in its true context, I think it's truly important to realize that while you're here, while you're on the earth, in the earth experience, while you're riding this roller coaster, A, you put yourself here, and B, it's really important that you learn how to take care of yourself and find your own fulfillment, enjoyment. And everything's not about feeling good. It's about coming here to get what you came here for, because, as you've heard me say for many years, my tag phrase, I was so delighted when you named your podcast, because I've ended so many talks, many books, with you already are that which you seek. And the reason I say it is because it's true. And so it's really important that when you come here and you are living a life and you're pursuing whatever it is that your soul came here to learn and grow and evolve from, we have to remember that sometimes that doesn't always feel good. And so evolution of the soul, self-actualization, actually comes from having the courage to be able to immerse yourself in experiences that don't always feel good. Because the conditioning, the grooming of the population is such, don't be in pain, pain's a bad thing. Here, take this pill. Here, avoid this subject. Here, let's make everybody exactly the same. Well, everybody isn't exactly the same. And every opportunity isn't the same, and every experience isn't the same. And people can have, it's like one guy smokes all of his life and the other guy never smokes, and the guy who never smokes dies of lung cancer. Why didn't this other guy? Because that wasn't on his path. And so when people have an actual understanding of that, but that's not fair. Nobody said anything about fair. It's really just important to know that your job while you're here is to find out, what did your soul want to glean from its time here on earth, not the other way around. This is why you already are that which you seek. That's why that is such an important phrase, because you came here from that space of knowing. And then people are like, why would I do that? Ask anyone who's ever lashed a bungee cord around their ankle and jumped off some insanely tall bridge. Why would you do that? Why would you risk your life? And they're like, the rush, dude. The experience of taking it to the precipice and diving in and coming back out, knowing that the odds that you're going to live outweigh the odds that you'll die doing it. You're willing to take the risk. And Earth is very much the same way. We come here because we want everything to be not perfect. We came from perfection. We want to be having a corporeal experience. We want to be in a meat suit. We want to be in a body that's fallible. We want to be, and when we're so deeply immersed, the people who don't actually understand who and what they really are, they're the first ones to tell you, but that's not fair. Why do good things happen, to bad people, and why do bad things happen to good people? It's just not fair. This was not supposed to be fair. This was supposed to be a playground of experience for you to reconnect with who and what you really are. You literally are putting yourself in the ultimate high risk experience and finding your way back out again. It's like a living escape room.
Yeah, I feel that very intensely. There's many, many days where I just want to go, I don't know why I picked this. I don't know what purpose I'm trying to achieve here, but it really hurts. It really sucks. I'm very confused and frustrated. Just send me home. But clearly, I'm still here. My path wasn't to be sent home. I tried to do that 4 years ago. I was in the very darkest of depths with trying to uncouple 37 years of Christianity and an upbringing that told me very specifically that, your God loves you very much, but you're also rotten, filthy, just completely unworthy on every level. And
there's a little contradiction.
A little bit. So the self-loathing and self-hatred doesn't just melt off instantly. And right now I'm just going through that, I feel like, prolonged dark night of the soul, where I'm trying to just try and feel okay about the choice I've made to come here and what my purpose is. And so.
Exactly. And a lot of people, because I would deal with a lot of people, within my own family unit, individuals who have attempted, contemplated, thought way too much about, or followed through with suicide attempts. And what a lot of people don't realize is that option's always available. It's always available. So when we talk about, oh my God, I'm trapped here. No, you're not. No one is. No one is trapped here. That is probably one of the biggest misconceptions in the world. Anyone, I could walk out my front door and walk in front of a car right now, and oh gosh, you can't talk that blasely about. Sure I can, absolutely I can. I think that's what people need to kind of reconnect with. It's not, nobody's keeping them here. That option to go. So some people do it slowly. They eat themselves to death, or they drink themselves to death, or they work in a hazardous setting or scenario that's going to speed up the deterioration of the physical body. Or someone can just jump off a bridge, or someone can jump into the river. It's the option is always there. It's the weirdness around it and the weirdness around talking about it. And this idea that people think we're trapped here, or we were forced to come here out of some kind of punishment, or that's why the whole kind of religious undertone of, original sin, and, that you were already dirty when you were born dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And you spend your life trying to fight your way out of that. And I mean, like, if you actually sat down for a skinny minute and thought that through, all you can do is start laughing. But we impose those things. Others impose those things on us when we're growing up. And what the real trick is finding your way out in such a way where you go, oh, I dove deeply into that experience in order to remember who I actually am.
Yeah.
Because I knew the second that I got into that was not me. So you can spend years and years and years and years trying to work your way out of, doing the dark night of the soul and the therapy and all this. Or when you mentioned frequency before, we found that you can utilize frequency to go in a very short period of time and blow up any neural pathway that allows you to go back to a space of trauma in relation to your earlier life, or into parallel realities or existences. And for some people are like, oh, well, she lost me there, that's ridiculous, she's cracked, whatever. And that's because they might not have that in their personal experience. I do. I broke my neck. I was in a car accident, 75 miles an hour. I watched myself die. I exited my body. This Christian minister's daughter, who had no idea that this was a possibility, knew in that moment that I was in complete control of my own life and death. And I was like, dude, that's going to hurt. That car is going fast. And out I went, and I got to witness my own death. And I got to have this most amazing experience following that. So, it's really important to realize that an awful lot of fear and an awful lot of self-loathing, they all hang out in the same neighborhood. Frequency wise, it's 396 hertz. And what's really interesting about that is that you can manipulate the human body. It's actually pretty easy to manipulate the human body in a most positive and negative way. But best way I can describe, let's say, for instance, when you described the whole dark night of the soul aspect because of your background and all this, well, are you the only one who's ever had a troubled background? No. At your age now, why is it affecting you still? Are there other people who are older than you who are still heavily affected by their youth? Yes. Are there people a lot younger than you who have found their way to happiness? Yes. So why? But if you were all experiencing the same kind of thing, the best way I can describe it is, where are you now? Where do you live?
I live in Savannah, Georgia, not far from your.
Okay. I know Savannah well. Okay. So let's say if you lived in Savannah, you and your wife were in a penthouse apartment overlooking the river. And I lived down on the riverbank, and I was collecting change in a little paper cup, and I was homeless. And we were moved to an independent location, and someone came up to us and said, hey, where do you live? What would you say? I live in Savannah.
I was waiting for a trick answer.
There is no trick. And I, living down on the riverbank, homeless, would say, I live in Savannah, right? But we're having two extremely different experiences of Savannah.
I got
you. Fear and guilt and shame and grief and anger and self-loathing, they all live in the neighborhood of 396 hertz. And we can have different experiences of that. And what happens a lot with people, especially when you get to your stage where you're just like, you can't seem to crack it. You're still doing that shame thing, or you're still doing that self-loathing thing. And oh my God, it's taking me forever to let go of the trauma of what happened. What is going on? Well, people become super saturated. And so when you're super saturated, no differently than if you had a full glass of water and you took a pitcher of water and started pouring more water into the full glass of water, what's happening? You're making a big fat mess everywhere, right? Or if you had a sponge and you were going to clean off the kitchen counter, but you didn't wring it out first, you're going to make a big fat mess. And so this is what supersaturation feels like, it looks like inside of the human body. So we're resonating with all these different things. So again, let's go back to 396, fear, grief, guilt, shame, anger, self-loathing. Well, when you're super saturated, what will happen is you'll get cross references. So let's say you're trying really hard, you're doing the work, you've had a really tough time, you have an understanding and loving wife, you're setting up this podcast to try and introduce yourself to people who are going to help you heal. We see it, we see what's going on here. But God Almighty, what is going on? Well, frequency is so important, because when someone is so full, when someone's sponge is too full, when they haven't wrung that thing out, when they are not doing a daily practice of clearing off the gunk of each day, what happens is messages and signals will get crisscrossed. So for instance, you could go out in your car and you could be pulling out of your driveway into the street, and let's say someone is flying down the street at top speed. It's their fault. They clip your wing mirror and you screech on the brakes and you're panicked, right? Like you take that breath in and then all of a sudden you burst into tears. Probably the appropriate response to somebody being that irresponsible is you're going to get fearful in that moment, and then you're going to get angry. But now you're sitting in a heap because the body has this flood of all the people in the 396 hertz neighborhood. They all come in and your body's like, oh, which one is it? Which one am I supposed to do? Wait, am I supposed to be angry here? That's why you get these inappropriate reactions. I don't know if you're a parent or not, but
Oh, yes.
a lot of parents will experience this feeling of anger when a child gets sick. Now, initially, of course you care, you're worried sick. My dad was classic with this. My dad, the minister, the football coach, let's do it. You can move on, tough it out. Let's go. He was so incredibly uncomfortable if something was wrong with me that he would get angry if I got sick. And it was really a funny thing. So to other people, he might have looked like a complete asshole. I totally, from the time I was little, I got it. I knew that was dad's way of saying, I feel completely out of control here. And so it would come across as being angry or aggressive. And so this is someone who's super saturated. This is when we crisscross those emotions. And so when we use frequencies to heal, it's almost like spiritual homeopathy. You're going in with a frequency and you're matching a frequency and you're tuning up the body instrument. And so when you start dialing back on all that oversaturation, you start reacting more appropriately to circumstances. Because let's face it, the trauma that you had when you were a youngster is not happening right now. You and I are on the phone talking in present time right now, but you can conjure a memory of that just like that through a chemical reaction. A chemical reaction takes place with this lovely little thing called, you've got neural pathways and neural plasticity, and you're going backward into a time and able to conjure a feeling that's physical, it's visceral through a chemical reaction. So now imagine if you put that individual into therapy and let's talk about this. Let's talk. And 7 years later, we're still talking, right? But your road back to the trauma is not so traumatic. It's not full of so many potholes. So it's a nice smooth road back to your trauma. It's still there. So what we do with frequency, it allows us to go in and begin to reprogram the brain. And instead of filling in the potholes back to a trauma, we actually change that chemical reaction. We change the direction of a neural pathway. We blow up any access to that trauma in a visceral sort of way, and we force the person that you are today, all the work you've done, all the growth you've had, the love you've experienced, all the things that counteract the trauma. We demand that this man in front of us today builds a new neural pathway back to that memory based on who he is now, not who he was when it was happening. And that's how frequency works. That is something that's available to each and every one of us. It was a huge part of my near-death experience. It all started with the sound, because when I was crossing over 6 lanes of traffic here and I looked and realized that the 81-year-old man driving the car was putting his foot down to get through the red light, which he blew through the red light and hit me because I was already almost all the way across the traffic. So he went way, way beyond the red light. And I knew in that moment that I was getting ready to die. And so it was at that point that there was this sound. I was flooded by sound. And it was the most beautiful sound to me because I like to play Irish music. I live here in Ireland. I know I don't sound like it, but I am a bodhrán player, the round drum. And my favorite instrument are the uilleann pipes. And those are the elbow pipes. So, the bag of air and the classic Irish pipe. And it makes this beautiful droning noise when, I associate that sound with a really good session. Like we're getting ready to have a great night. Because there's this wah, wah kind of low drone as he's filling the bag with air and he's tuning the pipes up. And it's magical. And it's the closest thing that I can describe to that moment when I realized I was getting ready to die. It was that sound. It was that frequency. And now, all these years later, I have come to realize, that sound was what was keeping me tethered to the physical form. So it is actually frequency and light dependent, frequency and light, they're just two different things on the same beam. Do you know? I was like, I have a greater understanding now that we are kept in the meat suit. This is literally a spacesuit, guys. You are not your body. And people are like, oh, yeah, but how often do they forget? This is a perfectly pressurized spacesuit for this environment. That's why if we leave this environment, we have to put on another external suit around this spacesuit. But in the environment that we live here on the earth plane, as the soul inhabits the body, it's a perfectly pressurized suit that is built to respond to our physical and emotional needs. And when money got involved, we began to realize that people stopped listening to their bodies because those who were in charge of making money and those who wanted to make money off of a large group of dumbed down people who stopped trusting their body, we began to realize what was the immediate pushing thing. Don't be in pain. Pain is a bad thing. Not pain as a warning signal that your life is off track. Not pain as knocking at your door to let you know that you need to step back and take a look at yourself and you need to change tact and go a different direction. There is I'm 30 plus years doing healing sessions here, and I've never met any cancer, any brain tumor, any HIV, anything that didn't have a story behind it. Not one. And I'm talking thousands upon thousands of people. And so what's interesting is that physical body and that emotional body, they all have a sound. And this was why in that near-death experience, the sound was so important, because as I came up and out of the body and I was watching my car spin and I'm like stuck in there behind the seatbelt, my neck is gone. My neck's broken because my head went through the driver's side window and back and it blew out. And I'm watching all of this from a bird's eye view. And this was so interesting, but that sound was always present in the background. And that's when I realized that that's what was keeping me attached to my physical experience. Because when I left that scene, when the me, not the body dead in the car, when who I am with all memories of me intact, by the way, when I left that scene and I landed somewhere so incredible, I have a very famous quote, that people are like, what was it like on the other side? I was like, it was so beautiful, it hurts to remember. Because it elicits that visceral response. And let me tell you what, same as yourself. I was a preacher's daughter. I spent a lot of time in church as a kid. It looked absolutely nothing like what I was told to expect. Nothing. And it's so interesting to this day. You're always going to have your different camps and people are like, oh, you're working for Satan. You're did that. I'm like, stop. No, stop it. So how come you don't talk about Jesus? Because I'm talking about me. The interview is with me, not Jesus. And people are so funny how they superimpose their needs or their ideology or their expectation. Well, you didn't, how come you're not talking about him? So you're not Christian. No, that's not what we're talking about here. We were talking about a car accident. Mm-hmm. And if you want me to lie to you and say that I saw Jesus, I could do that, but that's not what happened. And so they would prefer that I weave a different tale that suits their narrative. And it's really interesting. So I think that's why, as far as telling NDE stories, I don't change my story for anybody. It runs through the filter of how it happened. And, it's people love to put whatever headlines or, preacher's daughter didn't see Jesus and, whatever. I'm like, that has nothing to do with me. I don't care how people get to listen to the story, just that they get a different perspective. Because when I say to you, it was so much bigger than what I had been taught to believe would happen when I die. I'm like, get out, come on. What we're talking about, harps and clouds and, cherubs and, the old dude in the white beard. And I'm like, come on, guys, really think long term, think longevity, think eternal, think what eternal actually would look like. And it would get pretty boring if you were just sitting on a little cloud playing a harp.
Yeah.
But my dead relatives didn't meet me either. Who did meet me were two guides. And that was very interesting because I can tell you what, never heard about them in Sunday school. And these beings that knew me inside and out, what were they? Were they angels? Well, they didn't have wings. Were they extraterrestrial? Well, I mean, we were off of the earth plane. So, technically, yes, that qualifies. But these were guides, cheerleaders, guardians. They were with me from the dawn of time, as I was explained. And so I think that's just really fascinating because at those really, really low points, imagine if you felt that embrace in one of your lowest moments over the last 4 years, and you felt the knowing that there is never, ever, ever a moment when you're alone. You can leave at any time. You're keeping you here. Nobody else is. You're not under somebody else's thumb. You're keeping you here. You are your own guiding light. You already are that which you seek. And imagine if you actually knew this on a soul level, if you remembered this. And that's why I've been telling this story for so long, is to try and get people to reconnect with the idea you are never, ever, ever, no matter how lonely you feel, the only reason you can't feel or hear that whisper in your ear is because you choose to separate yourself from that knowing so that you can suffer. Because there is some part of you that needs to connect with that suffering in that moment. Does that mean you have to do it for the rest of your life? Depends on the person. I've met individuals who their entire life story was about that suffering. And I'm like, just make sure you suffer well, dude. Because if that's what you feel like you came here to accomplish, because there are often people who are offered other ways out of that suffering and they choose not to take that.
Yeah.
Right?
And I know for me, it's been a lot about putting myself in the victim role and saying that life is happening to me and, all these outside forces are out of my control. And so I've been poring over a lot of different interesting books, Course in Miracles, some Yeshua channelings, all these different things that are completely reframing all of that and just saying that, kind of the Kennedy quote, right? That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, which doesn't even really make sense because we don't even need to fear anything. So,
and it's interesting because it's a useful, gosh, if the bear's running after you, fear's a good
right.
thing.
We need it
because
here.
it'll get you up off your butt and make you start running. That's the whole point of the fight or flight mechanism within the human body. But what happens is people go there and then they pitch a tent, they build a bonfire, they start roasting marshmallows, and next thing you know, they've been in fear for weeks on end. And that's not the point. It's meant to kind of ebb and flow like a wave. And so it's really interesting that people understand that that's at their fingertips. They're in control of that 24/7.
Well, I guess it's the duality of who we are, right? That we have this survival need.
Now you've said the magical word. It's duality. And people hate duality and they spend all this time talking about Earth is set up as a plane of darkness and light for a reason. Because, some of the most beautiful paintings, portraits, pictures, weavings, tapestries, you have to have dark and light thread, dark and light paint in order to create a contrast that makes a beautiful piece of work. And so when we get so stuck on, oh, it's all the light, because my job, I always, the way I describe how I work with people now is to bring about whatever change is necessary for them. So I have a deep understanding that when people come to me for healing in a lot of people's eyes when they first walk through the door is, oh, that just means I'm going to get better. I'm going to walk out of here symptom free. I'm going to walk out of here cancer free. I'm going to, whatever. I call myself an agent of providence. And what that means to me is, no, I'm going to show up and do whatever it is you need to do in that moment. And it's not always the one that's the most comfortable outcome. And so I, thank God, learned early on when I came back from this near-death experience with a lot of gifts that I didn't have prior to it. Which was one of these was, I can tap into somebody's life in this plane and in any other plane they've been in, and I can extract where the blockages are. Past life, present life, future life, they're all part of the same loop. And I now have this ability to tap in via frequency where I'm watching it in my head like a movie. And it allows me to go and isolate an instance where somebody has given their power away, where somebody has lost part of themselves, where we need to go retrieve them from that space. So it's pretty phenomenal to be in a space where you realize that control is all on you, and thank God when I must have been in my 20s, the first time somebody came to me and they had cancer, and I realized that I had the capacity to heal that. I was able to tap into the story. I'm holding on to the person. The lights are pulsing. The energy is flowing, and they walk out without cancer. And 6 months later, guess who comes back? And I was like, oh, shit. And that's when the penny dropped. And I went, oh, your ego healed that cancer. Let's put the ego over here, because the ego is not a bad thing. But let's run it through a different filter and see if this person understood why they had cancer. Or was it really fun for you to show off that you could heal that cancer? And I was like, oh, holy shit. And thank God that happened early on, because I never did it again where it was, oh my God, please help me. I'm so sick. You've got to help me. I'm going to just heal my cancer. No. I'm going to help you understand why you have cancer, and then you're going to heal yourself. I'll assist, but you've got to know why this is in your life, because if you don't, then you've missed the entire point of the exercise.
That definitely resonates with my experience kind of initially in this journey. It was COVID was coming. My body was in horrible shape. I was sick constantly. And so I started doing the Wim Hof method, just found out about it on a whim. And then, no pun intended.
And a Hof.
Oh boy, I set myself up.
That's me every morning. 3-minute cold shower at the end of my shower.
Nice. Yeah. And I've gotten really undisciplined with doing that consistently, because it was for me about 6-9 months of just doing it religiously, doing the cold baths and all the cold exposure. And it completely snapped me out of suicidal ideation and the endless loop of self-loathing, which, hey, guess what? It comes back when you stop doing the things that worked. Big surprise.
Imagine that. Your teeth get dirty when you stop brushing them, too.
But I saw this.
It's really not rocket science.
It's not. But this natural doctor was saying the same things that you were saying, as far as, I had an injury, and he said, well, what were you feeling at the time of that injury? What emotions have you carried with you? And I was like, what does that matter, dude? Like, I was angry because I hurt myself. And he was very patient with me, because I was pretty much just writing off his entire premise for doing what he does, which he did a lot for me. But yeah, just reframing, thinking about injuries or trauma. And for me, it's going back in time to that little boy who was told, you're going to go to hell if you don't pick right. And just holding him and saying, dude, you forgive yourself, forgive everyone else who led you astray. And I'm just trying to, I guess that's the current mode I'm trying to employ, is just going back and going to specific events and literally time traveling, kind of like you were saying, back to those experiences and embracing that hurt and saying, it's okay. You don't need to identify with this.
Absolutely. But what I'm also hearing from the brief description that you gave of it is, people will, in earnest, they're like, okay, I really want to fix this. I really want to move through this. Part of the learning is looking at something that's not working. Why is it still here? Good Lord. Am I not getting it? Am I thick in some way? Like, what is going on here? Why is this still going? And this is where they get such relief from the fact going, no, what happens is things are recorded in the body on a cellular level. And on a cellular level, you have these little loops that can play. And so intellectually, you can have done the work. You understand. You've forgiven that little boy. You've forgiven the inner child, whatever it is. You've done the work. But still, you're reacting that same way. And this is where I was talking earlier on about supersaturation. And so when you're not in an exercise, that's why you felt so much better when you were doing the ice bath, because you were in a ritualistic cleansing of the body. Well, we do this with frequency as well. And so what happens is, as you continuously learn how to clear yourself, you're not getting clogged up. The rats don't come until the garbage is everywhere on the streets. It's not the other way around. So that's what happens within the body. And so something can be resonating or playing or looping. And, my favorite word, everybody's triggered all the time, and people can get triggered because they're able to be triggered. And the reason they're able to be triggered is because in reality, they actually haven't fixed jack. Look good. They did all the courses. They do it, but they're not utilizing it on a disciplined daily basis. Like you wouldn't think twice about not brushing your teeth. You do that every day. It just happens,
Yeah.
right? Because that was drummed into you from the time that you were a child. It was a habit that was good dental hygiene. I don't know too many people who would not brush their teeth every single day. And so I also don't know too many people who would not shower every day. It's a habit. What do? They feed themselves every day. But gosh darn it, I just had dinner last night. Well, I'm hungry again. Because the body is conditioned to need that kind of food, that kind of nourishment. But where people have really missed the mark is that everything is food. Everything that you put into your physical, your emotional, and your spiritual experience whilst here on earth is food. And people could have the best diet in the world where they're totally, they're doing whatever it is, they're keto or they're veg or they're carnivore, or they're vegan, whatever it is that floats their boat. And they're doing this thing, and yet they still have issues. And so that's because, have you ever tried sitting on a stool that only, a 3-legged stool with only 2 legs or only 1 leg? Because if you focus your time and attention and energy on just one of those things, it is a triune. It's the mind, it's the body, it's the spirit, which was why I went into chiropractic, because of the vitalistic philosophy that says that those 3 things are intrinsically entwined. And you can't have one in the full of its health without the other 2 being in the full of their health as well. So everything you put in, if you watch Netflix every single day, if you're on a series and that's all you do and that's all you feed your brain, then that's about where you're going to resonate. If you sit on a laptop all day long every day, that's where your brain is. If you're out in nature all the time at the neglect of your family, that's where your brain is. There has to be that balance. You have to have that physical, that emotional, that spiritual element met. And that's all down to what you feed yourself, the content that you put into your brain on a daily basis, the emotional state, the relationships that you have with the people in your life, the food and the exercise that you give to your body. Each of those is food.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us too, it's about trying to, or for me at least, speak for myself, it's about trying to figure the difference between discernment and judgment, trying to make good choices versus putting things in a box of, well, this is below me, or, one of the things I'm reading in Course in Miracles is just to see everything as God, everything as source, everything is being allowed from that. And therefore this tissue box in front of me is just as holy as I am, which of course,
there you
like,
go.
That doesn't make any sense. So, but it's, this process.
Let me tell you a story that will put that in perspective for you, because you're gonna appreciate this. So my father, the minister, he was a big dude, and he was also a world champion weightlifter. So he was very committed to his spiritual discipline, but he was super physically disciplined. He won the men's bench press title for men over 50 at the age of 69. Like, that gives you a little idea. World title, 3 times. And like he was drafted by the Colts and chose to go to the seminary instead. And then he got halfway through seminary and left it behind because he realized that he could affect more lives on the football field. So he was that guy. And, there are not too many people I've ever met in my life who had the kind of discipline that he had, as in his spirituality, his religion was important to him. Therefore, he read and studied it daily. His gym was a daily part of his life. And it was funny. Now, if you ask the family members, we probably came a little down on the totem pole because he was so busy doing the other stuff. We got glimpses of him, but he was a really great guy. He was a great guy because he was just who he was. It's when people don't meet these expectations of what we think is great that we fall flat on our face. Oh, he should have done this. He should have done that. He was perfectly perfect doing him just the way that he did. And you either understood that or you didn't. And if you didn't, you took it personally. Do you know? Me, I was fortunate that I got him from day one. I really did. I thrived on his energy where others might have found it hurtful. I really, really, it's almost like I knew why I picked him. So when my dad was dying, he had Alzheimer's. And so he was in a nursing home doing some rehab because he'd he'd actually broken his neck, believe it or not. And he was in a nursing home where he was doing rehab. Now, he was so far into the Alzheimer's at this stage, and that he hadn't been able to speak. So imagine, this big, deep, booming Southern voice. People loved to listen to his sermons because he talked about football, number one, all the time. And so it was never kind of fire and brimstone, you're going to burn in hell. It was always about your potential. He was very much that kind of a minister. And so imagine not hearing him speak for months on end because he couldn't speak anymore. All he could do was babble. He just lost that ability. And so my mother and I were in the nursing home, and it had been a really long day. He had very bad sundowners that day. He was just angry. They can get violent. And so we just had a tough day with him. And one of the things that I found so astounding at this stage was my father was afraid to go over and lay down in the bed. And I was like, this makes no sense. When he could still speak, he didn't like to lie down and go to sleep because he was afraid he was going to die. And I'm like, that's so weird to me. You spent your whole life talking to people about how to save their immortal souls and what waits for them in heaven. And now, like, push comes to shove and you're terrified to die. And it boggled my mind, right? So months had passed at this stage where he couldn't utter a word. And so he'd been shuffling around, and he'd go in the bathroom and wash his hands 800 times and shuffle around. Well, this one night, after this really hard day, he goes over to the bed. He gets into the bed. My mom and I are like looking at each other going, what is he doing? Because he'd been sleeping, sitting in a chair for ages. And he lays down in the bed, and next thing, he reaches up and starts laughing. He was like giddy. And I was like, oh, well, one of my abilities is I can see when somebody is getting ready to pass, and it looks like fireworks. And it's amazing. And my mom is like shooting me these looks going, is he dying? And I was like, no, there's no fireworks. But he's having an experience. And so we just watched, and he starts shouting. Now, remember, we haven't been able to hear him talk in forever. And he's like, I can see it. I can see it. I was like, hey, Dad. And it was like he was back. And I said, what can you see? And he said, it's the land beyond the river. And then he turns to me. My dad was also very funny. He turns to me and he pats my hand. And, at this stage I've written, probably like 8 books. And he goes, and it's more beautiful than anything you ever wrote about, sugar. And I was like, Dad. And so it was amazing because he is like gasping and is so excited. And he was like, Mama. And my mom's looking at me going, are you sure he's not dying? And I was like, he's not dying. He's having an out-of-body experience. And he was like, Mama. And he turned to me and he's like, she looks so young. And I was like, oh, well, then he freezes and he's like a deer in headlights. And I was like, Dad? And he's waving his hand, shh, shh. And he's looking. And he goes, Daddy. Daddy is here. Now, remember how disciplined I've told you my father is. We don't drink, smoke, or swear, and he's in the pulpit or in the gym. And my grandfather, my dad's dad, did not cut the mustard as far as my dad was concerned. I think he had a little bit of a drinking problem and a little, he had some stuff going on that a man of God does not deem passable to heaven. So my father, unbeknownst to all of us, had really harbored all of his life a terrible fear for his own father's immortal soul. He was certain, he hoped beyond hope that he had been forgiven, because that was what my dad's paradigm was. Hoped beyond hope that he'd been forgiven, but knew in his heart that he hadn't. This kind of way. So Dad is in complete shock, and he is, Daddy's there. Daddy's there. And it's like he's so shocked to see Daddy in the land beyond the river. And he looks to my mom and he goes, Helen, I've had it wrong all along. This is you think dying was something? This was my mic drop moment in my life. And he turned and he goes, I've had it wrong all along. You can't mess this thing up. Everyone's welcome here.
Love that.
And my mom is looking over at me. Her eyes are full of tears. And she's like, write that down. It was really one of the most significant things that has ever happened to me. And, oh, man, what a privilege to be able to see that. And really that kind of sums it up. And I remember I delivered my father's eulogy at his funeral, and there were like 1,000+ people in the cathedral or the sanctuary. And it was so everybody laughed afterwards because I told this story. And people stood up and started clapping. I got a standing ovation at a eulogy. Wow. Because this is the human spirit. This is what people want to believe. And the reason they want to believe it is because somewhere deep inside they know it to be true. So when I say to you, congratulations on the title of this podcast, because it falls in line with that premise of you already are that which you seek, there's a reason why. And that story for me kind of sums it all up. And, what more can you say?
Yeah, well, I love that story so much. And that you can't screw this thing up has been one of my favorite takeaways from just hearing your story, period. And it's something that is so hard to communicate with family, friends who are so ingrained into, no, you absolutely can. And in fact, you're screwing up by even sharing this with me and communicating this. You're sending people to hell. You're condemning souls. Like, you can get both extremes. And that leads me back to what we talked about way earlier when we dropped the big S word, talking about suicide, and how, you were kind of indicating because we're already secure in our natural state, essentially, and you didn't say this part, I'm adding that suicide it's not the big, bad, scary wolf we've made it out to be. But at the same time, for someone like me who's got 2 beautiful daughters and has wrestled with anxiety and depression, it doesn't feel like an option for me. It feels like I know that again, we're secure beyond the choices we make here.
Well, where your strength comes to play, you'll see. I have 2 beautiful daughters as well, and I spent a decade with one of them trying to kill herself. And so as a parent, people might go, oh my God, I didn't carry that. I know how this works. And one of the things that I also knew was that I loved that individual, my child, enough to step back and say, I was always there to lend a helping hand or to support, but you got to find your own way out of this. I will be here. I will love you. And if you choose to not be here, I will miss you terribly. But I can't force you to stay here. You have to have that graw, that will, that drive to be here. Nobody can have that for you. Because one of the most horrible things I think to walk around in the human form with is always trying to get out. You ever been in a conversation with somebody that was just horrendous and all you want to do is end it? Get out, get off the phone, walk out the door, whatever it is. So my daughter used to often describe that's what it felt like, not wanting to be here. I don't want to be here. I hate it. But she was also young enough never to have experienced some of the good stuff as well. Now she's in love and she gets to know what being in love feels like. And she was like, oh, and does it fix all of the problems? No, but boy, it makes it a lot easier. And so I wanted her to be able to stay alive long enough. And that's what I used to challenge her with, stay alive long enough to know what else is out there. Because right now, all you can see is pain. Right now, all you think you can feel is pain in this world. And yeah, there's a lot of it, but there's also a lot of other juicy stuff. And you've got to remember that no one else put you here. There is something that that divine, omnipotent, eternal soul that is you, that is residing within the meat suit. You put you here for a reason. Stick around long enough to find out what it was. And it got her through it every time.
Well, I guess when you see pain as a teacher versus a mortal enemy, that can really reframe your perspective on it. At least for me, that's been, I have a ton of physical problems with, I won't get into the details, but that used to feel again like
Meet your sister. Try getting hit 75 miles an hour.
I know. Sometimes I'm almost, there's that envious part of me like, man, I wouldn't mind it.
Joy is a choice, man. Joy is a choice.
That's what I'm discovering, is that we always, everything is choices. The choice to come here, choice to
Yep. To leave
the
here.
choice to stick with
That's all
the
you.
resonance and frequency of ego. That's something that, again, I'm trying to discern between where is the ego whispering all the BS that it doesn't have a clue about into my ear, and where is the spirit trying to communicate this sustained knowledge. And that was, again, my whole journey through Christianity. I think up until 6th grade was blissfully ignorant and just accepting everything. And then through a series of things that happened at a private school that I went to, I started to question everything. But at the same time, I went, certainly a merciful God has a way to save everyone. I just couldn't accept this idea that truly there are people who make finite crimes in this life and are punished infinitely for it. It just never made logical sense. And I've tried to reframe that with my parents, like, well, hey, if my daughters disobeyed me and disobeyed my will for their life, would I chain them up in the basement and torture them for the rest of their lives? Or would I use it as an opportunity to insert love into a very difficult situation and show them a whole new way? I don't feel like we should be able to supersede, God in terms of just coming up with a better plan. But it seems like the messaging I got, it was very easy to go, well, that doesn't even jive with like a creative, all powerful God. It doesn't even compute with me. So imagine the relief to find out.
That's because you've been taught all of your life that God was external. God was outside of you, that God was a separate being to you, as opposed to you being a fractal of that whole.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. That's what religion did to people, is it took them out of the equation, and the equation being, you can only find your way back, to salvation if you do X, Y, or Z. And every X, Y, and Z think they're the right X, Y, and Z. And if you don't do this, then you don't get to get. I mean, like, it's just when you actually step outside of it and you can have a laugh and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many people justify killing and maiming and doing whatever in the name of the Lord. And I'm like, it's just all part of the experience. But one thing I would say to you, because I'm a lot older than you, and I've had a lot of physical stuff. Like I said, broken neck is no small feat. And I work as a chiropractor, so my work is very physical. And
You got a broken thumb now, don't you?
Very physical. I do have a broken thumb now.
So your hip's better.
I tripped over my neighbor's dog. But what's really interesting is that what I do every morning is I wake up and I kind of pat myself down. Okay, I'm still here. And I look around, okay, just to make sure I'm still here. And I go, all right, what do I want to do today? What's on the list today? And I run through that list in my head and I go, okay, is the stuff I want to accomplish today bigger than the pain I feel right now? And it is always, there have been very few occasions, unless I was like really sick, where I just wanted to get on with it. So I might hobble on that day, or I might look, kind of odd, or I might be, in a lot of discomfort. And so I'll do what I can do, but I'll always do something.
Yeah.
Because the stuff that I have set out, because I treasure every moment that I have here, because I don't see this place as a punishment. I see this place and recognize it. It's like if you picked a bad holiday destination, you either have the personality who would sit and complain about where they were and spend that whole week complaining, or you have my personality type, which is I would go and, find the best thing I could do, in the place where I am, and make the best of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a challenge, because I'm so the opposite. When I walk into a room, I see every issue with, whether it be a safety issue or there's a fire exit blocked, or, I'm always looking for all the ways to make sure that I'm safe, and that it's so fear-based and so disabling. It's a choice.
Then you just do what I said. Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it. Knock it off. Do you know? It's just reconditioning. Yeah. So anybody who's curious about those frequencies, my website is maryhelenhensley.com. There is the guy who's created all these frequencies has created an app to make it easy and accessible for everybody.
Okay.
It's called Signs, SINES, signs.app. But I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm very grateful for you having the courage to set up a platform like this, because that's what we do. I heal to heal myself. You'll podcast in order to find your own healing. I write books. I'm glad other people benefit from them, but I did those to show myself, chicken, look what you did. Look what you did. So it's very hard to get down or feel low or feel trapped or feel out of control when you step back and you start seeing the fruits of your labors and going, God, I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I did that. And each and every one of us has that opportunity to do that. It's just, do we choose to live in that state of victimhood, or do we choose to gravitate towards understanding that we already are that which we seek?
I love it. Thank you so much for being on here and giving it a whirl. I know it was a little bit tricky getting set up, but hopefully I can have you back if all goes well. And
absolutely, I'd be delighted.
Excellent. Well, Mary, I hope you have a fantastic week, and hopefully I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.